Hello, everybody. It's time for part three, and Wallace Thurman's "The Black Letter, the Berry," and we're continuing on from page 26. Okay. She wondered why she never knew of the parties they talked about, and why she never received invitations to any of their affairs. Perhaps it was because she was still new and comparatively unknown to them. She felt that she must not forget that most of them had not known another for a long period of time, and what was and that it was necessary for people who belonged to be wary of strangers. That was it. She was still a stranger, had only been among them for about 2 weeks. What did she expect? Why was she so impatient? The thought of the color question presented itself to her time and time again, but she would always dismiss it from her mind. Fern Davis was dark, and she was not excluded from the secret inner circle. My mistake, sorry. This is from Chillhop music. I'll cite the music from this YouTuber afterwards, but the title is Chill Study Beats 2 Instrumental Jazz Hip Hop Music 2016. Okay, very sorry about that. Let me continue on. Perhaps it was because she was still new and comparatively unknown to them. She felt that she must not forget that most of them had not known one another for a long period of time, and that it was necessary for people who belonged to be wary of strangers. That was it. She was still a stranger, had only been among them for about 2 weeks. What did she expect? Why was she so impatient? The thought of the color question presented itself to her time and time again, but she would always dismiss it from her mind. Vern Davis was dark, and she was not excluded from the secret inner circle. In fact, she was one of the most popular colored girls on the campus. The only thing that perplexed Emily was that although Vern too was new to the group, had just recently moved into the city, and was also just beginning her first year at the university, she had not been kept at a distance or excluded from any of the major extra collegiate activities. Emily could not understand why there should be this difference in their social acceptance. She was certainly as good as Vern. And time, Emily became certain it was because of her intimacy with Hazel that the people on the campus she really wished to be friendly with paid her so little attention. Hazel was a veritable clown. She went scooting about the campus, cutting papers, playing the darky for the white students. Anytime Hazel asked or answered a question in any of the lecture halls, there was certain to be laughter. She had a way of phrasing what she wished to say in a manner which was invariably laugh provoking. The very tone and quality of her voice designated her as a minstrel type. In the gymnasium, she would do buck and wing dances and play low down blues on the piano. She was a pariah among her own people because she did not seem to know, as they knew that Negroes could not afford to be funny in front of white people, even if that was their natural inclination. Negroes must always be sober and serious in order to impress white people with their adaptability and non-difference in all salient characteristics save skin color. All of the Negro students on the campus except Emily laughed at her openly and called her Topsy. Emily felt sorry for her, although she too regretted her comic propensities and wished that she would be less of a vaudevillain and more the college student. Besides Hazel, there was only one other person on the campus who was friendly with Emily. This was Grace Giles, also a black girl, who was registered in the School of Music, the building in which she had her classes and located some distance away. Grace did not get over the main campus grounds very often, but when she did, she always looked for Emily and made her welcome overtures of friendship. I'm sorry, and made welcome overtures of friendship. It was so second year in the university. and yet she too seemed to be on the outside of things. She didn't seem to be invited to the parties and dances, nor was she a member of the Greek letter sorority, which the colored girls had organized. Emma Lou asked her why. Have you have the pledge, do you? Have the pledge, do you? Was Grace Skiles' answer. Why no? Then and they won't either. Why? Emma Lou asked surprised. Because you are not half brown or half white. Emma Lou had thought this too, but she had been loath to believe it. You're silly, Grace. Why, Vern belongs. Yeah, Grace had sneered. Vern, a bishop's daughter with plenty of coin and a big buck. In a big Buick. Why shouldn't they ask her? Emma Lou did not know what to make of this. She did not know. She did not want to believe that the same color prejudice which existed among the blue veins in Boise also existed among the colored college students. Grace Giles was just hypersensitive. She wasn't taking into consideration the fact that she was not on the campus regularly, and thus could not expect to be treated as if she were. Emma Lou fully believed that had Grace been a regularly enrolled student like herself, she would have found things different, and she was also certain that both she and Grace would be asked to join the sorority in due time, but they weren't. Nor did the entire term in the school change things one whit. The Christmas holidays had some and gone, and Emma Lou had not been invited to one of the many parties. She and Grace and Hazel bound themselves together and sought their extra-collegiate pleasure among people not on the campus. Hazel began to associate with a group of housemaids and mature youths who worked only when they had to, and played the pool rooms and the housemaids as long as they proved profitable. Hazel was a welcome addition to this particular group with her car and her full pocketbook. She had never been proficient in her studies, had always found it impossible to keep pace with other students, and finally realizing that she did not belong and perhaps never would, had decided to go to the devil and be done with it. Sorry. It was not long before Hazel was absent from the campus, more often than she was present. Going to the cabarets and parties and taking long drunken midnight drives made her more and more unwilling, unable to undertake the scholastic grind on the next morning. Just before the midterm examinations, she was advised by the faculty group to drop out of school until the next year and to put herself in the hands of a tutor during the intervening period. Intervening period? It was evident that her background was not all that it should be. Her preparatory work had not been sufficiently complete to enable her to continue in the college, and it was, they told her, she was wasting her time. So Hazel disappeared from the campus and was said to have gone back to Texas. Serves her right. Glad she's gone, was the verdict of the colored campus fellows. The Christmas holidays for Emma Lou were dull and uneventful. The people she lived with were rheumatic and not given much to Yuletide festivities. And it didn't seem like Christmas to Emma Lou anyway. There was no snow on the ground, and the sun was shining as brightly and as warmly as it shone during the late summer and early autumn months. The wild geraniums still flourished, the orange towers still blossoming, and the whole Southland seemed to be preparing for the annual New Year's Day tournament of Roses Parade in Pasadena. Emma Lou received a few presents from home and a Christmas greeting card from Grace Giles. That was all. On Christmas Day, she and Grace attended church in the morning and spent the afternoon at the home of one of Grace's friends. Emma Lou never liked the people to whom Grace introduced her. They were dull, They were a dull, commonplace lot for the most part. People from Georgia, Grace's former home, untutored people who didn't really matter. Emma Lou borrowed a word from her grandmother and classified them as butlers because they seemed to fuddle everything. Their language, their clothes, their attempts at politeness, and their efforts to appear more intelligent than they really were. The holidays were over. Emma Lou returned to school a little reluctantly. She wasn't particularly interested in her studies, but having nothing else to do, kept up in them and made high grades. Meanwhile, she had been introduced to a number of young men who had and gone out with them occasionally. They too were friends of Grace and out of the same caliber as Grace's other friends. There were no college boys among them except Joe Lane, who was flunking out of the School of Dentistry. He did not interest Emily, as it was with Joe. So it was with all the other boys. She invariably, picked them to pieces when they took her out, and remained so impressed to their emotional advances that they were soon glad to be on their way and let her be. Emily was determined not to go out of her class, determined either to associate with the right sort of people and or else to remain to herself. Had anyone asked Emily what what she meant by the right sort of people, she would have found herself at a loss for a comprehensive answer. She really didn't know. She had a vague idea of that those people on the campus who practically ignored her were the only people with whom she should associate. These people, for the most part, were children of fairly well-to-do families from Louisiana, Texas, and Georgia, who, having made nest eggs, had journeyed to the West for the same reasons that her grandparents at an earlier date had also journeyed west. They wanted to live where they would have greater freedom and greater opportunity for both their children and themselves. Then, too, the World War had given impetus to this westward movement. Was more industry in the West, and thus more chances for money to be made, and more opportunities to invest this money profitably in property and progeny. The greater number of them were either mulattoes or light brown in color. In their southern homes, they had segregated themselves from their darker skinned brethren, and they continued this place practice in the north. They went to Episcopal, Presbyterian, or Catholic churches, and though they were not as frankly organized into a blue vein society as were the Negroes of Boise, they nevertheless kept more or less to themselves. They were not insistent that their children get whiter and whiter every generation, but they did not want to keep their children, but they did want to keep their children and grandchildren from having dark complexions. A light brown was the favored color, and it was therefore found expedient to exercise caution when it came to mating. The people who, in Emma Lou's phrase, really mattered. Sorry. Okay. The people in Emma Lou's phrase really mattered. The businessmen, the doctors, the lawyers, the dentists, the more moneyed Pullman porters, hotel waiters, bank janitors, and major domos, and in fact, all of the Negro leaders and members of the Negro upper class were either light-skinned themselves or had light-skinned wives. A wife of dark-skinned complexion was considered a handicap unless she was particularly charming, wealthy, or beautiful. An ordinary-looking dark woman was no suitable mate for a Negro man of prominence. The college youth on whom the future of the race depended practiced this precept of their elders religiously. It was not the girls in the school who were prejudiced. They had no reason to be, but they knew full well that boys with whom they wished to associate, their future husbands, would not tolerate a dark girl unless she had, like Vern, many things to compensate for her dark skin. Thus, they did not encourage a friendship with someone whom they knew didn't belong. Thus, they did not even pledge girls like Grace, Emma Lou, and Hazel into their sorority, for they knew it would make them the more miserable to attain the threshold, only to have the doors shut in their faces. Summer vacation time came. Emma Lou went back into Boise. She was thoroughly discouraged and depressed. She had been led to expect so much pleasure from her first year of college in Los Angeles, but she had found that the people in the larger cities were, after all, no different from people in small cities. Her Uncle Joe had been wrong. Her mother and her grandmother had been right. There was no place in the world for a dark girl. Being at home depressed her all the more. They were there was absolutely nothing for her to do, any place for her to go. For a month or more, she just lingered around the house, bored by her mother's constant and difficult attempts to be maternal and irritated by her cousin's Buddy's freshness. Adolescent boys were such a nuisance. The only bright spot on the horizon was Sunday school union picnic, scheduled to be held during the latter part of July. It was always the crowning social event of the summer season among the colored citizens of Boise. Who was both the Methodist and the Baptist missions cooperated in this affair and had their numbers augmented by all the denominationally unattached members of the community. It was always a gala, democratic affair designed to provide a pleasant day out of doors. It was besides the annual dance fostered by the local chapters of the Masons and the Elks, the only big opportunity gathering to which the entire colored population of Boise looked forward. Picnic day came, and Emma Lou accompanied her mother, her uncle, and her cousin to Bedney's Mellow, a green, heavily forested acre of parkland which lay on the outskirts of the city, surrounded on three sides by verdant foothills. The day went by pleasantly enough. Sorry. The day went by pleasantly enough. There were usually heavy laden wooden tables to which all adjourned in the late afternoon, and there were foot races, games, and canoeing. Emma Lou took part in all of these activities and was surprised to find that she was having a good time. The company was congenial and found that since she had gone away to college, she had become somewhat of a personage. Everyone seemed to be going out of his way to be congenial to her. The Blue Veins did not rule this affair. They were, in fact, only a minority element, and for one of the few times of the year, mingled freely and unostentatiously with their lower class brother. All during the day, Emily found herself paired off with a chap by the name of Weldon Taylor. In the evening, they went up for a stroll up the precipitous footpaths in the hills which grew up from the meadow. Weldon Taylor was a newcomer in the West, trying to earn sufficient money to re-enter an Eastern school and finish his medical education. Emma Lou rather liked him. She admired his tall, slender body and the deep burnish of his bronze-colored hair and his massive black curly hair. Here, thought Emma, is the type of man I like. Only she wish that his skin had been colored light brown instead of dark brown. It was better if she was to marry that she did not get a dark-skinned mate. Her children must not suffer as she did, as she had, and would suffer. The two talked commonplace things as they walked along, comparing notes of their school experiences and talking of their professors and their courses of study. It was a dusk in the sun and had disappeared behind the snow-capped mountains. The sky was a colorful haze, the master's artist's canvas on which the colors of day were slowly being dominated by the colors of night. Weldon drew Emmylou little off the little path they had been following and led her to a huge boulder which jutted out, elbow like, from the side of a hill which was hidden from the meadow below by clumps of bushes. They sat down, his arm slipped around her waist, and as the darkness of night more and more conquered the evanescent light of day, their lips met, and Emmylou grew lax in Walden's arms. When they finally returned to picnic grounds, all had left, save a few stragglers like themselves who had sauntered away from the main party. These made up a laughing, half embarrassed group who collected their baskets and reluctantly withdrew from the meadow to begin the long walk back to homes. Emmylou and Weldon soon managed to fall at the end of the procession, walking along slowly, his arm around her waist. Emmylou felt an ecstasy surging through her as is at this moment, greater than she had ever known before. One moment. Okay. All right. All right. All right. This this had been her first intimate sexual contact, her first awareness of the physical and emotional pleasures able to be enjoyed by two human beings, a man and a woman. I'm sorry, a woman and a man. She felt some magnetic force drawing her to this man, walking by her side, which made her long to feel the pleasure of his body against hers, made her want to know once more the pleasure which had attended the union of their lips, the touching of their tongues. It was with a great effort that she walked along, apparently calm, for inside she was seething. Her body had become a kennel for clashing, screaming, compelling urges and desires. She loved this man. She had submitted herself to him. He gladly suffered momentary physical pain in order to be introduced into a new and incomparably satisfying paradise. Not for one moment did Emmylou consider regretting the loss of her virtue. Not once did any of her mother's and grandmother's warnings and solicitations revive themselves and cause her conscience to plague her. She had finally found herself a mate. She had finally come to know a man should love. Some inescapable force had drawn them together, had made them feel from the first moment of their introduction that they belonged to one another, that they were destined to explore nature's cruel nature's mysteries together. Life was not so cruel after all. There were some compensatory moments. Emmylou believed that at last she had found happiness, and that at last she had found her man. Of course, she wasn't going to go back to school. She was going to stay in Boise, marry Weldon, and work with him until they should have sufficient money to go east, where he could re-enter medical school and she could keep a home for him and spur on him. A glorious panorama of the future unrolled itself in her mind. Sorry, 1 second. There were no black spots in it, no shadows, nothing but luminous landscapes, ethereal in substance. It was no way of Emmylou always to it was the way of Emmylou always to create her worlds within her own mind without taking under consideration the fact that other people and other elements not contained within herself would also have to aid in their molding. She had lived to herself for so long, had been shut out from the stream of things in which she was interested for such a long time during the formative years of her life that she considered her own imaginative powers omniscient. Thus, she constructed the future world of love on one isolated experience, never thinking for a moment that the other party concerned might not be of the same mind. She had been lifted to into a superlatively perfect emotional and physical state. It was unthinkable and incongruous that Weldon, too, had not been similarly lifted. He had for the moment shared her ecstasy. Therefore, according to Emmylou's line of reasoning, he would effectively share what she imagined would be the fruits of that ecstatic moment. The next 2 weeks passed quickly and happily. Weldon called on her almost every night, took her for long walks, and thrilled her with his presence and his lovemaking. Never before in her life had Emmylou been so happy. She forgot all the sad past, forgot what she had hitherto considered the tragedy of her birth, forgot the social isolation of her childhood and of her college days. What did what did being black, what did being antagonistic mental attitudes of the people who really mattered mean when she was in love? Her mother and her Uncle Joe were so amazed at the change in her that they became afraid, sensed danger, began to be on the lookout for some untoward development. For hitherto, Emmylou had always been sullen and morose and impertinent to all around, meant to all around the house. She had always been the antisocial creature they had caused her to feel she was. And since she was made to feel that she was a misfit, she had encroached upon the family life and sociabilities only to the extent that being in the house made necessary. But now she was changed. She had become a vibrant, joyful being. There was always a smile on her face, always a note of joy in her voice as she spoke or sang. She even made herself agreeable to that cousin Buddy, who in the past she had either ignored or barely tolerated. She must be in love, Joe. Her mother half whined. That's good, he answered laconically. It probably won't last long. It will serve to take her mind off herself. But suppose she gets foolish, Jane had insisted, remembering no doubt her own foolishness during a like period of her own life with Emmylou's father. She'll take care of herself. Joe had returned with an assurance he did not feel. He too was worried, but he was also pleased at the change in Emmylou. His only fears was that perhaps in the end she would make herself more miserable than she had ever been before. He did not know much about this Weldon fellow, who seemed to be a reliable enough chap, but no one had any way of discerning whether or not his intentions were entirely honorable. It was best, thought Joe, not to worry about such things. If, for the present, Emmylou was more happy than she had ever been, there would be enough time. Sorry, There would be time enough to worry about the future when its problems materialized. Don't you worry about Emmylou. She's got sense. But Joe, suppose she does forget herself with this man. He is studying to be a doctor, and he may not want a wife, especially when. Damn it, Jane! Her brother snapped at her. Do you think that everyone is like you? The boy seems to like her. Men like anyone they can use. But you know as well as I that no professional man is going to marry a woman as dark as Emmylou. Men marry anyone they love, just as you and I did. But I was foolish. Well, that's right. Be unconcerned. That's right. Let her go to the devil. There's no hope for her anyway. Oh, why did I marry Jim Morgan? And why had she gone into the usual crying fit, which inevitably followed the self-put question? Then, without any warning, as to put an end to all problems, Weldon decided to become a Pullman porter. He explained to Emily that he could make more money on the railroad than he could as a hotel waiter in Boise. It was necessary for his future that he make as much money as possible in as short a time as possible. Emily saw the logic in this of this and agreed that it was the best possible scheme until she realized that it meant his going away from Boise, perhaps forever. Oakland, California was to be his headquarters, and he, being a new man, would not have a regular run. It was possible that he might be sent to different sections of the country each and every time he made his trip. There was no way of his knowing before he reported for duty just where he might be sent. It might be Boise or Palm Beach or Albany or New Orleans. One never knew. That was the life of the road, and one had to accept it in order to make money. It made Emily shiver to hear him talk so dispassionately about the matter. There seemed there didn't seem to be the least note of regret in his voice, the least suggestion that he hated to leave her or that he would miss her. And for the first time since the night of their physical union, Emily began to realize that perhaps after all, he did not feel towards her as she did toward him. He couldn't possibly love her as much as she loved him, and at the same time remain so unconcerned about having to part from her. There was something radically wrong here, something conclusively and unexpected, which was going to hurt her, going to plunge her back into unhappiness once more. Then she realized that not once had he spoken of marriage or even hinted at that their relationship would continue indefinitely. He had said that he loved her, that he had treated her kindly, and had seemed as thrilled as she over the physical context. But now it seemed that since he was no longer going to be near her, no longer going to need her body, he had forgotten that he loved her. He was then that all the old preachments of her mother and grandmother were resurrected and began to swirl through her mind. Had she been warned that men don't marry black girls? Had she been told that they would only use her for their sexual convenience? That was the case with Weldon. He had taken up with her only because he was a stranger in a town and lonesome for a companion, when she, like a damn fool, had submitted herself to him. And now he was about to better his condition, about to go to some place where he would have a wilder circle of acquaintances. She would be discarded and forgotten. Thus, Emily reasoned to herself and grew bitter. Okay, sorry, this is going to be part 4 of the end. I'll be good to good to sorry, continuing on afterwards. All right, have a good one.